All right, so let's start with just a quick catch up on how the exam went. Were there any surprises, any questions, anything we should discuss? Nope, pretty straightforward in terms of the instructions, in terms of what was there. Yeah, you all did very well overall, which was great to see. Your essays were really strong. You did a really nice job. And then you should also have feedback from me by now on your formal analyses. Hopefully that popped up for you. Any questions on that? Okay, that was also, you guys have done, y'all have done the strongest work for the first formal analysis out of any of the classes that I've taught. So give yourselves a round of applause for that. That was really great. I can also see this is the first time too that I've had group work on this, and I can see that that really helps. So nicely done. That was great. So your next formal analysis was originally due today, but because I didn't publish it properly, I've extended your deadline to the 15th. That being said, if you have already written it and or you would like to make your lives easier, turn it in at any time from today through the 15th, because you do have an exam this Friday, so it might be helpful for you to get it done sooner. But I'm giving you that full time. It's yours to have. Just organize yourselves accordingly. Good. Okay, we had a TED Talk presentation scheduled for today, and it's going to be bumped to Wednesday. I want to go through the details of the formal analysis that is due this week, just to give you time to look at that carefully, ask questions if you need to. So while last time many of you chose your homes and others of you chose buildings or construction in your region or neighborhood, this time I want you to not choose your own home, but look at a house in your neighborhood. Now, this is assuming that people live close together. If you happen to live where people are very spread apart, if you are in a rural neighborhood or something like that, just let me know and we'll come up with something else. But the idea is to look at houses that you are generally familiar with or buildings that you're generally familiar with and do this kind of careful detail. It's fun to see what comes up from the things we see every day and sort of take for granted. So that's the idea. The details are here. It's going to go much the same as your last one. You'll write an intro paragraph to give your reader an overview. You'll move into the detail. And then I think, as many of you saw from my feedback, this time you'll focus on writing a strong concluding paragraph where you take the architectural details, the color, the texture, the shapes, the way that parts of the building are organized, and start to think about what the architect or the homeowner or the original builder of the home might have had in mind. What were they trying to say through those architectural details? And in this, I encourage you to just think broadly. Think about what this neighborhood represents, who lives there, what are they trying to evoke with those buildings. You will never be penalized for overthinking it. So just reach. Don't hesitate to do that. If you have any questions on that part of it, just let me know. Okay, so today we are looking at primarily North Africa. We are looking at an incredible series of architectural projects made out of earth and mud. Some of them are centuries old. Some of them are quite new. We'll look at a range of different approaches to mud and earthen architecture, keeping in mind what we set up at the beginning of the class, which is this idea that we're looking at architecture through the lens of the Anthropocene, meaning we're looking at architecture through the lens of the ways that humans have appropriated the materials around them to create architecturally interesting, purposeful, and productive forms. So our class goals, we're going to be looking at climate appropriate technologies. We're going to be thinking about their role in cultural cohesion. Our material study, of course, is mud, earth, and sand. And the different architecture that we'll be looking at today, we'll be looking at the architecture of the Tuareg. We'll be looking at Ait Ben Haddou in southern Morocco. Wadi Hadramaut and Wadi Dawan in Yemen, and the Great Mosque of Jenne at Mali. And we'll take just a few minutes on the Mbari termite architecture. Earth as an architectural medium has a long and symbolic history in Africa, and in many ways it's continued through today. While new forms have emerged, they remain rooted in a very illustrious past. And today we're going to look at the way that earthen architecture functions as a material, as a metaphor, and in an environmental context, and also as an intervention. Architecture is one of the earliest and most fundamental ways that humans use to shape physical reality. It's quite literally terraforming. So from prehistoric societies until today, we've used trees, earth, rocks, and water to create a wide range of formally and conceptually diverse structures. The availability of these resources causes different building material or building traditions to emerge around the world. Of course, just if you live in a forested area, you're going to tend to work with trees. If you live in an area with rocks, you're going to tend to work with stone. It's just the natural appropriable material. So we're also going to look today at the difference between stationary architecture and mobile architecture, the way that climatic conditions, environmental conditions set up a way of thinking about appropriate technologies. It's a very modern term. It's a thing that we have come to focus on, let's say in the last 20 years, roughly in the last 10 years specifically, where we're thinking about what architecture is appropriate to the climate. This idea emerged over time as we realized that the colonial era, where builders and architects were bringing ideas from, let's say, England to the colonized locations of India and otherwise, and sort of pushing the English architectural model on the Indian subcontinent. In many ways, it didn't make sense. The form didn't have anything to do, of course, with the traditions of those regions, and the architectural techniques that you would need in England, where it's rainy and it's colder, are not going to be applicable, particularly in the warmest parts of India. So as we're thinking about decolonization in architecture, as we're thinking about climate in architecture, this idea of climate adaptive technologies has come about. So just take a minute to look at these different examples of architectural forms they're coming from across the African continent. What stands out when you look at them? Yes, Meredith.
I think that the buildings look very similar to like the color of the environment around them. So it's like it's very obvious that they made these buildings and structures from what they have directly around them, I guess.
Totally, they blend into the ground level in an obvious way. Good, great point. What else? Yeah, Christina.
Going off of that, they seem to have very like organic forms. There are not a lot of like straight edges or sharp corners. So it's again the idea of like coming from the earth. They're making it out of the earthly material.
Yeah, absolutely. This mud, earth, sand mixture allows for more curvilinear forms. It benefits from more curvilinear forms. And so we see shapes emerge that we haven't seen in other structures before. Great. Anything else?
It looks like a very homey architecture with like domes and roofs and like semicircle doors. It looks very like a safe environment for people to live in. Yeah,
that's a great observation. Kind of an intuition that it looks and feels homey and safe. And then, as you pointed out, these domes, these ways that are almost, let's say in the Cameroon example, that are almost like replicated hive or cave shapes. You know, things you feel like you can nest into in a way that's different than large rectilinear architecture, for example. Good. Anything else? Yeah, Sophie.
I think it's really interesting in the Cameroon example, kind of the texture that they were able to create on the outside and how that mirrors the dome shape of the building itself.
Yeah, fantastic. It's so true. But before I comment further on that, Lucas, you had your hand up. I didn't want to miss what you're
Yeah,
saying.
I was saying it's interesting that this is probably one of the only places in the world you could build structures like this because I'm assuming the rain is probably your number one enemy. It would melt your house away. So this is a great spot to build them.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is well conditioned to the climate for the reasons you just said. Um, Floods would devastate the area, but also earth and mud structures, as we'll see in a just a terrific video down the line in today's class. They have also fantastic properties for heating and cooling. They're just terrific at mitigating the climate in ways that stone wouldn't have been as successful at doing. Ways that timber, other things that aren't even in the area for the most part. Mud has great insulating properties. Good. Great. So we've covered form, texture, function, and the decorative quality of these works, as you pointed out, Sophie. There's a terrific architectural historian at Harvard who makes the case over and over again by looking at architectural case studies that the urge to decorate is one of humanity's oldest urges, to make a place our own through some sort of ornamentation, whether that would have been early tapestries or some of the things that we see here in terms of different paint and color and the texture work on those domes, just a way of really making it one's own, of taking something very functional and transforming it into something that is pleasing as well. So something to keep in mind as we look at these. Great. So just a little background on where we are. We are looking at Africa as a whole. We'll have different case studies in different nations across the continent. But there's some fascinating work being done at a series of different universities, university labs, that are looking at the way that the African continent has been transformed by climate over millennia. So what we think of now as the dry Sahara in the north and the more green midsection of Africa itself, these are things that haven't always been the way that they are. They have changed over time, and we'll see through architecture and through art evidence of this transformation of the continent. We could say this for most any continent, of course. If you go back far enough, they're going to be wet, very different conditions. But here it's particularly striking just because we think about all of Africa as dry, and it most certainly is not and has not always been. Move through this. So one of the ways that we are receiving kind of notes from ancient cultures are through these fantastic rock carvings that appear across different parts, particularly in Mali, but different parts of northern Africa. So just take a second, tell me what we're seeing here carved in the stone.
Giraffe.
Yeah, they're giraffe. Any ideas of what kind of conditions giraffes live in? See it on Nature Channel or something like that. Like what kind of, what do they eat?
Savannah?
Yeah, they're in the savannah for the most part. And the savannah is certainly not the same as a desert. So this sandstone carving that is over 11,000, anywhere from 7,000 to 11,000 years old, stands out as a marking of what this region might have looked like before. It's hard to imagine people living in a desert who have never seen giraffes coming up with a drawing of a giraffe. So with some indication they must have been there. On top of that, what can we say if it's a very difficult angle, and the reason it's like this is because these carvings are enormous. What can we say about the way these carvings are formed? Are they realistic? Are they abstract? What's going on in the way that they're executed? Yeah, Brad.
I'd say that they're pretty realistic just because of like all the detail that went into putting like the spots on it.
Yeah.
But the face does look a little abstract, I guess.
Yeah. So we could call it a blend. You've got this intent to re-articulate what they're seeing in the world. And at the same time, as you pointed out in the face, there's this move toward interpretation that comes out in a little bit of an abstraction. And I just want to iterate and reiterate throughout the course that often this choice between realism and abstraction is it's not a lack of skill. It's often an intent to express something in a particular way. And that's what we see here. So again, we have an example in the sand rock carvings of pack animals that would never show up in the desert. And some of these paintings, some of these carvings are as old as 25,000 years. So we can see the transformation of this continent through the work itself. Here you can see giraffe, you can see some sort of animals, pack animals that would have needed, grasses would have needed very different conditions than we see there today. So as we think about the people who now inhabit North Africa, we want to think of them as people who have really mastered life under incredibly difficult conditions. Some groups are still nomadic. Many of them use that nomadic lifestyle to survive and for the purposes of trade. They have learned how to navigate a system of climatic and environmental events and conditions in a way that is quite masterful. One of the ways we can see that is through their architectural forms. So just basically, what are we looking at here among the Tuareg people that are shown?
I mean, they're traveling across the Sahara on camels and donkeys, which are generally pretty good for carrying loads in a place with very little water.
Yeah, excellent. And what kind of architectural form are they relying upon?
Tents, easily set up, taken down.
Yeah, tents. And just like you said, these have been fine-tuned over time to be efficient, effective, lightweight, things that can travel on the backs of the donkeys as they move. Most of the region that is traveled by the Tuareg is what's known as the Sahel. You see it here in this band right across that upper widest strip. It lies between dry grasslands of the savanna and grassy plains in the tropical and subtropical regions of the continent. There are very few trees, and they're dealing with sandstorms. They're dealing with all different sorts of semi-arid to arid conditions. And as you pointed out, they are using tent-style architecture to live in and navigate these conditions. They seem very simple, but they are climatically appropriate technologies, right? Here are just a few more examples. And then coming back to that idea of that decorative impulse as one of the most fundamental, even under circumstances where you are traveling light, traveling as light as possible, the elements that they're bringing with them are highly decorative, highly personalized, and they have come to represent the people, the tribes, the groups that are moving together. Another form of this architectural and design impulse, of course, comes in clothing. When you are dealing with climate in such a frontal way as these people are, what they wear is not only decorative, but it's highly functional. We see that in the drapery, in the turbans, of course, that are designed to keep the sand and the heat off of their heads. All of this, I think, in some way it seems so basic, but we want to begin to think about architecture as more than just, or as climatically or ecologically appropriate architecture, as more than just like a LEED building that has 4 stars for being efficient and effective with the use of the materials that are there. There are older groups, older ways of doing this that can inform the way we think about architecture today. So next, we'll move on to Ait Ben Haddou. Has anyone been to Morocco? Yeah, Sophie, great. Which parts were you in?
I was mostly in Marrakesh. I didn't get to go see this particular site, but we did go through the mountains with like some of the tribes and got to meet them and see like how their structures were different than in the bigger cities.
Yeah, fantastic. So if you haven't traveled to Morocco, Ait Ben Haddou has been in a series of famous films and TV shows and movies. Most recently, this was one of the first towns that the Khaleesi in the Game of Thrones went to free the enslaved people there. You'll see this backdrop come up again and again in fantasy and historical fiction because it's just so spectacular and eye-catching. So Ait Ben-Haddou was built in the 17th century. It's located in the Southern Atlas Mountains, and it's one of the most elaborate earthen architectural structures that we'll look at today. It stands out as both a haven in the midst of the desert. It is a cultural as well as a almost military outpost for both the traders who were traveling, some like the Tuareg who would pass by that we just looked at, and others, of course, made their home there. The city itself is no longer, or this part of the city itself is no longer inhabited. People have moved to flatter ground as this has been taken over more and more as a historical site and for movies. But when you look at the image here, what are we seeing? What are we looking at?
I definitely see like monochrome color throughout the whole building, and I see like some details, especially at the top of the architectural site.
Yeah, excellent. Matthew.
I think it's interesting how like the climate's reflected because a lot of the roofs are very flat and like where there's a lot of rain, it typically tilted so it can drain off versus these are like mostly flat roofs.
Yeah, absolutely. We would tend to see gabled roofs in places with a lot more rain. And great observation. What else? Rosie.
And then you could also see a lot of squares and rectangle shapes. So I wonder if that just understands like their basic knowledge of geometry and math and learning how to work with their surrounding environment to create those shapes and create kind of that sort of order of like defined sides and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a clear square and rectilinear repeated mode of construction. And we'll see in more detail how that emerges out of the shape of the mud bricks that they're working with. It was just a very easy connection between these rectilinear forms and the bricks themselves, which are large flat rectangles. We'll see that in a second. Good. What about the small holes that you can see? They're kind of windows, kind of small openings. Because we're looking at it from the top down, you don't see them quite as head on as we would if we switched back to the other image, but you can still see them there. What's going on in those?
Weren't they, I think you mentioned it in the video that they like help regulate temperature.
Yeah, they do. And in a bizarre way, in a hot place, one inclination would be to make giant windows so you just have like airflow coming through. But the cooling conditions of this mud was so effective that the small windows allowed for airflow, but also blocked a couple of different things. Do you remember or any guesses as to what those are? So if we think about these dry desert-like conditions, one thing that's going to come up are sandstorms, a way to prevent all of that from coming into your home or your place of worship at any time is keep the windows small. Also, because these were outposts, because they would sometimes come under attack, those small windows, of course, protected the people inside and also allowed people to bow and arrow style attack from the windows as well. Another thing that was important in terms of both the dust and wind and this protective layer in the city is the way that it's constructed almost as a labyrinth. There are no clear throughways where someone could just run right through the city and do whatever they intended. It's very convoluted, and unless you're familiar with the place, it's hard to navigate through quickly. And that also helps with dust. Okay, good. What's happening here?
It kind of reminds me of the style that the Nabateans used to use on the top of the front doors for their temples.
Yeah, really nice. That crow step shape is located in those cornice pieces at the top. Good observation. What else? Yeah, Ellen.
It looks like they carved like designs like all over the front faces of the building. I guess to give like some beauty to the earthen material that they use.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we have this impulse toward, design, embellishment. And in this particular building that we're looking at, and among the Amazigh people that have constructed this particular location, these embellishments were both religious and they were an imported part of the Islamic beliefs that came to this region through trade, through the mix of and mingling of people and ideas along the Silk Road, for example. So what we're looking at are embellishments, engravings, and symbols that come from the teachings of Muhammad. And they arrived in North Africa from Saudi Arabia around the 8th century. Here they're appearing in the brickwork patterns that are inscribed in the plaster. As you said, they're just carved out as the mud and plaster on these buildings was still wet. Some of them represent the hand of Fatima, and Fatima was the daughter of Muhammad. And this hand, you can see most of them have, in their largest extension, have 5 points. It was seen as a way to ward off the presence of the evil eye or of evil spirits, which would cause a great deal of harm. And it is also representative of the 5 pillars of Islam. So we see in these geometric forms a deep and symbolic meaning for the people living here and within them. Okay, good. Now let's move on to this just mind-blowing series of mud and earth structures. And I'm going to just take a few minutes to show you part of this video that really gets into the way that mud and earthen architecture are made.
I left Rashid on my right and turned into the black slits of streets that climb uphill
Can you hear
between
it?
piled-up houses of Khariba. This is the chief town of the Upper Valley with market and mosques. The name means a ruin, and it may be the Diwan mentioned by Ptolemy and by Hamdani. We came to the market, whose wonders I'd heard of from my Bedouin guide. It was but a narrow alleyway, and on its high doorsteps the sellers sat, outlined against black rooms behind them, with baskets in their laps. They weighed their meat in red and yellow painted scales. It was the busy hour, and the children crowded round, but all were friendly. They asked questions and stood to be photographed.
هتستخدم اساس للحجر عشان ايوه يبقى على رجول ما الرجول ما يجمع يبقى على رجول انت عندك بنت عندك ما يجي انا داعي بري ما يجرون اما لا ما تعبر مو فرابر مو كل مو بسط خشب كل مو بسط خشب ولا هذا بسط كما العسكر كما بتنزل نفسك كما صب الجسر كم عرض الجدار فوق الأول قصر أو القصر على مطرح الجدار كم عرض الجدار في أول قصر فوق السقف مباشرة مو يعني في ذراع ولا ذراع وفي 3 فوت على كبر الدار وعلى نيجان جدا وبغى تدفع تكون من 3
Once again.
كم سنين وانت تشتغل في المهنه؟ 60 سنه 60 سنة 60 سنة كم سنة الفتح حتى صرت معلم؟ والله يمكن 30 سنة. وهل أبنائك أيضا فنانين؟ أولادك أيضا؟ لا واحد منهم ما لهم ولد. They didn't like to be pilgrims. عندنا شغل وتعب. The building is very hard. يدينا على وصل كل يوم في الصلاة. لكن نوري انت عملت هذا الفريم للمدى؟ ايوه حجم البرواز اللي تعمله حجم البرواز اللي نعمله هذا الهيش او بالصعب؟ لا بالصمت بالهيش هذا بالهيش هذا سنتي انا مقول 18 هيش 12 يعني بالطول او طول المدى هذا العرض يعني عرض المدرسة هذه بس 25 لا؟ لا بليش 12 ونص 18 19 هذا مخمس لا مكسر كبير هذا علم هذا مخمس صغير هذا مدار صغير قول حبيبي هذا بقى ثلاث هذا آخر اللجنة هذا آخر دور طابق الرابع هذا ايش نوع من الخشب؟ ماليزي ماليزي هي خشب سابق علم بس الآن بعبر الزمن السابق كان عندهم الأخشاب محلية
All right. So what comes to mind watching that?
The bricks in the product were a lot flatter than I would have thought.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? It's an unusual shape from what we're used to seeing as bricks. Good. What else?
In one of the first portions of the video, when they were walking through the streets, I just thought it was crazy that it looked like a city, because like the buildings were so tall and like,
yeah,
it's crazy to think they're made out of like mud and like stuff from the earth. I don't know. It was very interesting.
Yeah. What's your inclination, any of you, when you look at that? What would you assume it was made out of in there?
Would it be like from kind of like carving from the mountain? It looked like they were like all sitting next, like from whenever they like zoomed out, it was like a big mountain behind them. It kind of looked like the mountain is like a base, and either like carved from the mountain or like put mud from the mountain. I don't know.
Sure. No, especially coming from our chthonic section, it seems like, well, they might have just carved that out. Mm-hmm. And it certainly doesn't seem like mud brick is going to be able to stack 7, 8, 10 stories tall. It's mind-blowing. What else stands out as you watch that video? Simple observations, anything?
The way they made the bricks, it was almost like they were farming. Like they planted it down, they shaped them, they took away the mold, and they waited until they dried, and then they like harvested them and created stacks.
Nice. That's such a good visual for how that's taking place. Really good. Really good. What about that work?
I thought that like a lot of the work could be like done with your hands, like with very like simple tools kind of. And like even at the beginning, he was asking like how wide something should be, and he was like, it's this unit of measurement and then like 4 fingers.
Yeah.
It just shows that like they just use their hands a lot.
Super resourceful, relying on the body. In some ways you can see those guys as a group of construction workers sitting around like, yeah, this one's this size, this one's this size. Why do you need to know this one's this size? You can feel that they're a little bit like, bleh. But those are the simple details that make these outstanding structures. Yeah. The thing that surprised me when I first saw this is just the way that, so we saw one of the men in the mud pulling straw down to make a straw, water, and mud mixture. And just like modern carbon fiber, or we'll see later with reinforced steel, most materials need some other string-like or linear form to bind them together in order to create tensile strength. You know, if you took a mud brick, we've got our famous arch building example. If you took a mud brick and then you put some weight on top of it, you can imagine just mud by itself is just going to crack. But just the addition of that straw in there creates a group of tensile structures so that it has more strength when pressure is pushed down from the top. Super simple materials, but a very ingenious way of working with them. The other thing that blew my mind is just why, they do that. They've got an earthen layer that they're starting with. Then they put that mud, straw, whatever mixture on. They put their forms there to make them into bricks. Why does it, they're using that pickaxe. For me, I felt like, why doesn't it just stick to the ground below it? How does it, this is just dirt under there and dirt up here. What's the difference? How were they able to peel them back? And then also hit it with a pickaxe basically afterwards, and it didn't fall apart. And so we just see the strength, as you said, in these really, really simple materials that they have fine-tuned. Okay. Let's go back to the PowerPoint here. Okay, so from those monumental multi-story towers that they were building in the desert, modernizers have come in and said, why don't you do this with concrete block instead? It'll be so much easier. It'll be so much faster. You just ship them in and let's get this done. And what I didn't show you in the rest of the video is that that happened. There was this big wave of concrete structures being built, and everyone moved out of them. They were far too hot. The insulating properties of mud were of such a better quality than the concrete that the idea of using concrete out there was quickly abandoned. It was, of course, seen as a good, modern, almost Western technology to be imported. And people quickly realized that what they had developed for themselves over time was superior to this sort of modern way of doing it. It's not always the case. Sometimes new technologies come in and they are better. They bring a better quality of life to the people there. In this case, it didn't. And we'll see this play out a little bit now in this next case study. Okay, so we're now looking at the Jenne Mosque in Mali. This is a site that truly embodies both a structural and a symbolic program. The mosque is located in the town's main square, and it's really the architectural, cultural, and spiritual center place of the community itself. It's also the largest freestanding earthen structure in the world, and it's existed in one iteration of the other or another for over 700 years. It has been rebuilt, it has been resurfaced. It is part of a resurfacing celebration that happens annually. We'll see that a little bit more in a minute. The Jenne Mosque was also really important in the Malian Empire. I think you saw some videos on Mansa Musa and his relationship to this site. Any insights, things you want to say about that? Nope. Okay, we'll move on. All right, so what are we looking at here? What stands out? Stefan.
Well, what I noticed first is the beams on the top and on the body of the architecture, and also according to that articles, it's used as a scaffolding.
Yeah.
And I think it's also have decorative function here.
Absolutely, decorative, structural, and scaffolding functions, as you said. Great. Yes, Rosie.
And then also, I think one of the videos or articles mentioned how there's an ostrich egg on top, and it kind of represents the purity of the region and all of that. So I thought that was a very interesting decision on that part.
Yeah.
And also, the little structures coming out everywhere, it almost makes it seem kind of like how strong, or I don't know, they seem like they would hurt. So it just seems like it's almost like don't mess with me, like they're sticking out and kind of showing their strength. Yeah.
Yeah. You think of it, if you were a giant and you backed into it, those things are going to be pokey in a way that's uncomfortable. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah, totally. Good. Okay. So the Jenne Mosque is, as I said, it's really the heart of the city of Jenne in Mali. You can see it here in the upper left in this plan of the city. There is a great open space, a plaza space around it. The Jenne Mosque was built originally around 250 BC. It was part of a rudimentary market that was at the heart of the village as well. Its location on the Niger River is really key because when that river floods, it brings silt and different materials into the region that, like the straw we saw in the last video, created an additive layer to the mud that was already there. And that additive layer strengthens the natural properties. Jenne's primary population group, they're known as the Manding, and you can also call them the Mende people. And they were primarily merchants, and as I mentioned, trading with North African traders, they encountered the religion of Islam and brought it back with them. In order to solidify the importance of Islam and sort of to make it the state religion in a sense, the Jenne Mosque was built as the primary space of worship for the Manding people. Okay, so we've mentioned the wooden structures that provide sort of not exactly a post and lintel structure, but certainly the lintel structure on which some of this mud hangs. What's going on in these front figures here? Do you remember that from the reading?
Were they like tombs or like memorials or something?
They're memorials. Absolutely, they're memorials. They aren't tombs. There are no bodies within them, but they are memorials. Yes, good. Anybody else want to say anything about that? Let's look at them in a little more detail. So like the Navajo people, the Munding saw the earth as a representation of their ancestors, or even the embodiment of their ancestors. And in order to really concretize that symbolism, many people would create these memorial mounds to their past grandparents or family members, people who were important, who would still stand with the family in a very literal sense around the home. The Jene Mosque is that group of towers, the low-lying towers around the outside, are there for that same reason. These also are representations of agricultural fertility. They are male and female symbols to fertility, and almost a call for fertility from the earth, spots to be revered in a sense. So we could call them, probably the easiest summary is to call them ancestral pillars. And you can see how they have an almost anthropomorphic form. All right. This earthen symbolism gets very interesting when we start looking at the face or the facade of the building and what is known as the potige amongst the peoples that we're looking at. Anybody come across this before? Anyone know about a potige? So they incorporate, you can see them here on the left. It's the part right around the door and coming up from the door. These have very symbolic meanings. They're a very anthropomorphic element on the facades of the house themselves. So let's start with this standard potige over here on the right. Any guesses as to what's going on? These are a stretch for us when we think about doors and entryways, so let me just give you the update. So let's start first with the easiest parts. The 5 pillars of Islam, or the hand of Fatima, are represented up here in these 5 forms. From there, this entryway to the door is considered the male form of the home. It represents sort of the masculine elements, the masculine part of the partnership in this very heteronormative culture. Here we have this small little lock and key and a small opening. Keeping on the theme of fertility that was represented with the ancestral mounds, these symbolic structures are meant to represent the male and female of the home. We have the small opening that is representative of the female, and we have the large pillars that are representative of the male, and it is a way of putting on the outside of their home their hope for many, many children. So there is a clear but sublimated, not so sublimated, reference to reproduction, fertility, a heterosexual union in the potige in the front of the house. This potige repeats itself on the front of mosques. It appears on many, many different famous structures. There's always a way of thinking about the future, not only the ancestors, but the children of the future too, through the creation of these facades. But you can see that there's something else going on here too. What's going on in the juxtaposition of the mask and that potige on the left? Yeah,
the potige seems to be a scaled up version of that antelope mask.
Yeah, great. So is that, what were you were going to say something?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And
Yeah.
Also, like mirroring their surroundings again, so it's not only using the material from the actual earth, but they're basing the structures off of the animals that they see on a daily basis.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have the human animal, the male and female representation. We have the animals that are part of their lifeline, their supply, their environment. We see that again in the inspiration coming here from the mask on the right, the front of the same building of the entrance to Jenny on the left. Then one of the most spectacular things about the Jenny Mosque is this festival that happens every year, where all of the people from the town come together to contribute in their different way to resurface the mosque. So it's a huge, let's see if I can do this just a second without causing a debacle.
Tout jeune de la ville de Djenné, et chaque année, à chaque répétition, nous participons tous à ça. J'ai été désigné par les vieux du quartier pour un peu jouer le rôle d'organisateur de groupe qui devant transporter, c'est-à-dire l'argile du bas-fond du fleuve jusqu'à la mosquée. Et une fois arrivé au niveau de la mosquée, diriger les jeunes pour apporter, c'est-à-dire l'argile aux maçons.
Okay, good. So what comes out in watching that? What different view of architecture does it give us?
I think it demonstrates how important the mosque is to everyone in the community. Like you're saying that it is kind of like the place that embodies the cultural center of the community. So obviously if all these people come together and work to replaster it like every single year and they all look like they're having like an amazing time doing it, it must mean like so much to them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's community building in a very direct way, right? The kids, I skipped over the part where they talk about the elders. There are groups of elders who are in charge of making sure things are covered properly and with the right thickness. But basically, it's a mud fight for the kids on the ground. It's going to be amazingly fun. And as you said, they are participating in the work. They then can look at the mosque as something they have participated in creating. It just symbolically and functionally is a way of drawing the people together in that city. So you can see that if they're plastering year after year, layer after layer, some of it, of course, is peeling and buckling and drying out. It needs to be resurfaced. But as that's happening, those walls are getting thicker and thicker. They're becoming heavier and heavier. And often, at least 3 times in the history of Jenné's existence, it had to be rebuilt altogether because the weight of those layers created a collapse. So within the last decade, a group from MIT, well-meaning architecture students and faculty went in and did an assessment along with UNESCO, which is the UN body for architectural preservation and heritage. They went in and did an assessment which concluded that the mosque itself needed to be torn down, rebuilt with concrete, and then a surface layer could be put on with less frequency of the mud in order to keep the integrity of the building. Of course, this created a huge outcry. Not only did it change the symbolism of the building itself as something uh, built by hand from the people themselves, it also messes up their annual celebration, mud fight, and function. It's one way when we start to think about architectural preservation that this gets very, very tricky. For example, if I were to ask you, what is the thing, when you look at Gen A, and if you were an architectural preservationist or historian, what is the thing that you're trying to preserve here? What are the options of the things that you're trying to preserve? Yeah, Matthew.
I think like the key point is to try to remain like keep like the critical like the cultural aspect, right, and like in the community aspect. And make if you make the building like permanent, like one of the things that like makes this building so interesting is that it's like not entirely permanent, and like there's always like required upkeep, and it means a lot to the community to come together and kind of continue working on it. And if you make it just like a permanent building, you kind of lose that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And lose a bunch of the history as well if you like tear it all down. So
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the knowledge built into the community of how to do this, of how to create these mud and plaster structures. Good. Other thoughts? Anybody else? There is, of course, a roaring debate about these sorts of things. When you, as an architectural preservationist, are you preserving the building as we see it right now? Are you preserving the building as it was when it was first built? Are you preserving the community functions? What are the different aspects? And often you can't do them all at the same time. And so people are trained in these fields to know the different varieties of options. And some of the best, at least in my opinion, work directly with the community, as they didn't in this case, to say what is important to you that we keep. What are the things that you want to see maintained here? And then dig in and engage in a way that the preservation community is working with the local community to see that happen. All right, we'll wrap up quickly with this absolutely crazy example that occurs in southern Nigeria. So if you are grossed out by bugs, feel free to tune out. Just listen to me at this point. You don't have to look at your screen. Things can get a little gross. So the most ubiquitous insect living creature in West Africa is the termite. It's revered for its tenacity, its ability to survive, not just to survive actually, but to really thrive in a very unforgiving climate. And because of this, many in West Africa have come to see the termites as sacred. Now, looking at them in that bottom left picture, they are hard to look at. They are a little grotesque, but nonetheless, the structures that they create are almost unparalleled in the insect animal world. And they really push even human architecture in terms of what they are able to create and achieve. Let me show you just this bit of this video here. Again, if you're creeped out, just don't watch.
Lives the queen. She produces 1,000 eggs a day to provide fresh recruits for the teams of gardeners and masons and the ranks of the army. She resides in a special chamber which the workers renovate and adapt to accommodate her growing bulk. After a year or two, she is in effect a prisoner, for she's far too big to squeeze through the corridors that lead to her residence. But that is of no consequence. She's so bloated with egg-producing machinery that she couldn't move even if she wanted to. And her eggs, as she produces them, are carried away to the nurseries by the attentive and indefatigable workers. There are 1.5 million insects in this one colony. They and their gardens generate a lot of heat. Within this enclosed building, the air could easily become foul and hot. The fungus, and therefore the colony itself, would die if the temperature varies by more than 2 degrees from 31 degrees centigrade. But the colony has a solution, and it's an architectural. This, 6 feet beneath the surface of the earth, is the cellar of the colony. Its floor is studded with shafts that go down 12, 14 feet, down to the water table, where the worker termites can gather moist mud to carry on their building. And its ceiling is a great plate which carries the entire weight of the colony. But on its underside is what I think is really the most remarkable animal structure I've ever seen. Lines of concentric veins. They are made of mud and they absorb moisture from the colony above. And as it evaporates, it leaves this incrustation of white salt. But more important than that, as it evaporates, it cools. So that this, the cellar, is much the coolest part of the colony. But that is a real concern.
Sorry about that. Okay, so in those termite mounds, what's going on? They've created air conditioning. The termites have air conditioned their own homes. It's just crazy. So I don't know who that guy is. He's more intrepid than I am, but that space that he was in, you know, as he pointed out, the termites have dug 12 to 18 feet down to a kind of aquifer or the water table below. By doing that, they create cool air, moist air that rises up into those termite mounds. And you can see now from him being able to crawl in the bottom just how big these things are. They're massive. They are like skyscrapers, termite skyscrapers, basically. So down below those, as you saw, all those sheets, it creates a way of wicking cool air up into the rest of the termite homes. It is a spectacular feat that these tiny little things that we think of with, you know, like no brain, have figured out over time and just replicate by instinct. It's just mind-blowing. It is also mind-blowing to the Mbari people who create these regular almost temples or memorials to the termites and their mode of living. This is a close-up of one of these Mbari temples. So what's happening here, these are earthen structures. There are new ones made for tourists that are concrete, but they have long and always been earthen structures built in such a way that they will deteriorate over time. It is a way of recognizing the impermanence of life, the effort put into building these termite structures, building these human structures that will then dissolve, dissipate, break down, and fade away over time. The process of creating these memorial structures or these spiritual and religious structures are as elaborate as we saw at Gen A. There's a group of elders who are in charge of making sure things are done to historical spec and tradition. And then the entire community comes together to build, decorate, and design these Mbari structures. It's almost, again, like a life festival in itself, a recognition of the impermanence, a recognition of the journey of the work that then fades and recedes back into the ground. There's little evidence of this practice continuing now into the contemporary period, other than these sort of replications that have been made for tourism. But we do have archaeological and anthropological data that shows and documented these forms over time. All right, we've covered quite a bit today and quite a few things that are sort of off to the left or to the right of center from what we have looked at so far. So just to reiterate, the main takeaways are thinking about each of these different things, from tents to these termite celebrations, to the Jenny Mosque, and to the different structures we saw from Ait Ben Haddou to Wadi Hadramat, where there is a mode of working with local materials in a climatically appropriate way for the people themselves. We're looking at things that are made simply, but with great development and skill. There is an embodied wisdom in these buildings that is different or not different from the way we think about stonemasons or brick masons, a way of passing on an understanding of how to build and how to optimize what's available at hand. Any questions on all of this? Okay, thanks for your attention today. Thanks for your patience with my technical issues. I will see you via recorded lecture tomorrow. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.